Hi, welcome to this regroup hour. It's wonderful to have you here. I hope you've got somewhere lovely to settle in, to listen, or maybe you're walking somewhere and able to look at the sky, look at the trees, look at whatever's around you, and just spend a little bit of time with yourself and with me and with the others who are listening now too. So the regroup hour is a regular time to join together and join together for some rest, some relaxation, a bit of self-care. I'm Henny, I'm a coach and a retreat host, and I've got a special interest in how self-care helps us make and manage change successfully, which all feels particularly resonant with what we're going through currently. So during the regroup hour, we look at the different facets of change, and often the content builds on the work that we do within the retreats or the work that I do one-to-one with the coaching. And they're a mix of sharing tools, and sometimes we have guests who are always really stimulating and inspiring. And essentially it's a gentle hour just to step away from whatever's going on. I say an hour, hour-ish, these things are fairly kind of loose and fluid. And it's truly a time to regroup with ourselves or with others, either virtually or metaphorically, or maybe once lockdown is over, we'll do some of these together. Who knows where it'll go. So I was thinking about the subject for today, and I kept coming back to an idea that I shared with the ladies who joined us on our retreat last year, our weekend retreat last year. And it's the subject of weird tennis. And it's a phrase that I've coined in my own life that seemed to resonate with some of the people that I've talked to about it. And I thought it might be interesting just to share it today. And then quite often when I'm doing the retreats and doing the half-day virtual retreats, or doing coaching even, or doing these regroup hours, I'll turn to my bookshelves behind me and I'll just see if there's a little bit of inspiration, something that particularly stands out. I'll pick a random book off the shelf, and quite often there is something there. And today I picked up an old journal and flicked through it to see if there was anything in there that really related to this idea of weird tennis. I'll come on to what weird tennis is in a moment. And I flicked through and I see, no, there's nothing really there, and then landed on one. So what I'm going to do today is talk a bit about weird tennis and why I think it's can be a useful thing to be conscious of. And then I'm going to read to you from the journal entry that I wrote a little while ago, a few years ago. So what is weird tennis? Have you ever noticed when you're in conversation with somebody else that you suddenly notice that you've been talking at cross purposes, where and you realize that the conversation has kind of gone south, like you didn't notice kind of why or when it happened, but you're talking with the other person, and it feels like you're conflicting, like there's some kind of conversational verbal sort of battle starts arising. And as far as you were aware, there was nothing to trigger it. There was nothing to instigate it. Like you didn't enter that conversation expecting it to become difficult to navigate or whatever. And your sense is that the other person also perhaps didn't enter it feeling confrontational. And it can be, this thing about sort of miscommunication. It's a device that's used in films and in theatre and in sort of creative art a lot, as a way of, it's used in lots of plot lines as a way of sort of illustrating how confusion has arisen between two parties, and often then goes off into sort of some hilarious farcical outcome. The challenge is that when we experience it in real life, it often doesn't go off into hilarious, amusing outcomes. It can lead to an argument. It can lead to one or both parties being upset. And it can lead to like multiple recurrences of it. So certainly for me, that's something that I've noticed, is that if my husband and I embark on a conversation that sort of ends up in that place of which I have come to term weird tennis, I'll come on to why, then if we have like a really good rally, then we can often find that we end up playing that game again. And so the reason why I started to think of it as weird tennis is it's a bit like, I think I'm playing tennis. I have a tennis racket and I have a tennis ball. And then partway through the conversation, I now notice that actually perhaps the other party is holding a badminton racket and a shuttlecock. And neither of us have realised that we're actually playing a completely different game. And we have no idea at the beginning that we've picked up different rackets, and we have no idea that that we've picked up sort of different balls, or or a shuttlecock instead of a ball. It's something that just kind of emerges, and it's also kind of like when we're in this conversation that we're both playing by different rules, that the conversation is being driven by different rules, just as if we were playing two completely different racket sports, but with no idea that the other person is playing by different rules, that the other person is playing a different game even. Kind of one way to think about it would be a bit like in Alice in Wonderland, when I think it's the Red Queen, when she's playing croquet with the flamingos. And sort of she can like put down the croquet mallet, and the flamingo just gets up and wanders off. It's this, things start to take on a little bit of a surreal edge sometimes, particularly when we're in a very close relationship with the other person. And what happens is because we know each other so well, we start to make more and more assumptions about what the other person's doing. So just as if we were playing a game, two parties either side of the net, you make an assumption about what stroke the next person's going to take next. And of course, assumptions are often misguided, and sometimes wildly wrong. So we think they're playing a long shot, and we go to the back of the court, and actually they've just done a really nice little tap over the net. And obviously when that happens in a conversational sense, it becomes really frustrating, and it can trigger a spike in emotion that then just adds to the game. And it's a little bit like shouting "new balls please," and we start lobbing everything over the net at each other. So there's also another kind of facet to it, where I think that sometimes these challenging conversations where things, have just kind of spiraled out of control in a way that we were not anticipating, it can be hard to leave it as a draw. So again, coming back to this sort of game analogy, we're busy playing the game, and we realize that neither of us is going to win, but it's really hard to leave it as a draw. And so you think you're walking off the court, and then something gets lobbed over the net back at you, and you send it back over, and there you are, you're back in the game again. There's and there are some other kind of facets that come in here, such as old hurts can start to appear, and so we kind of rootle around in our pocket or in our sort of bag at the edge of the court, and hook out another ball to throw into the conversation, to throw into the game, to, you know, and it all can escalate, and we end up maybe playing multiple games without even realizing it. So there are like threads and threads and threads going through the conversation that just add to the confusion and add to the emotion and make things feel more challenging, maybe spiking in anger, maybe spiking in frustration, maybe spiking in upset, tapping into old hurts and making us feel vulnerable, ultimately. And of course, sometimes these games aren't just played in private. Public games of weird tennis are an interesting one, where neither you nor the spectators understand what game is being played. And I'm not sure if this resonates with you, but sometimes, you know, where you observe that there's perhaps a couple who are a bit unpredictable when they're, you know, in a group setting, and you know, in that kind of snipey sort of, you know, where facets of their relationship start getting played out, but, you know, with subtle kind of digs at each other. Again, for me, that's like evidence of an ongoing game of weird tennis. And obviously the outcome from that can be that people start to choose not to spend time with that couple, because it becomes difficult, it becomes unpredictable. You know, if we can't, we don't know what game they're playing, we don't understand, and we can see that they're not like playing the same game, it can make us not want to spend time with them. And if that is us in that relationship, it can also lead to us starting to isolate ourselves or isolate us and our partner, because we recognize that other people are witnessing what's going on with us, and we don't want them to see us playing whatever weird tennis game we've got going on. So what's the purpose of talking about all this? For me, the value in it is that it's useful to identify it, and just having kind of named it for myself has been really useful, has been a really powerful step. Actually, it gives us a kind of shorthand to identify it, to name it, and one of the things is that when we name problems or challenges or repetitive behaviors, patterns that we see in our own behavior, then we can start to address them. We can also disempower them. We start to take away some of that kind of energetic, emotional energy that they have, and it gives us an opportunity to have a bit of perspective, to step back and go, oh, okay, so there's this thing going on, I see it. And just being able to do that is wonderful. I see it, I name it. Oh, okay, I can now call it out. I can now explore it. I can look at it through clearer eyes, and I can work out what I want to do with that. This phrase, I did a half-day retreat yesterday all about balance, and the phrase, it's just information, was a really repetitive refrain through that session yesterday, because when we start to think about what we are observing, it's just information, and then we can choose what we wish to do with it. It gives us a sense of control and a sense of empowerment that we perhaps were missing before. You know, and if our choice, when we witness this kind of weird tennis going on, if our choice is to go, right, all in, I'm getting every ball out of my bag, I'm going to play lacrosse and tennis and badminton and every other racket sport I can possibly think of, and I'm going to lobby the whole lot over that net. Well, that's your choice. It's always a choice. But if instead of that, you go, oh, hang on a minute, I have a feeling we might be about to play, or we're already playing a bit of a game of weird tennis. What do I want to do with that? I might want to put my racket down. Then that's a choice. And that's all it is. It's just a choice. It's just information, and it's a choice as to what you do with it. So I think there are a few stages to that. And if we work on those stages going backwards, that can be useful. So if kind of the first stage is that we do a bit of a post-match analysis with ourselves or with the other person, depending upon like where the two of you are at, in terms of how comfortable you feel about communicating with each other about things like this. But even if it's just like post-match analysis with ourselves initially, then that's good enough. So recognizing what was going on without judgment, it's just information. And if we're doing it with the other person, that we kind of make a contract with them that we're not going to pick the rackets up again. We're just going to notice, oh, okay, we were playing weird tennis. We were playing weird tennis. That might be enough. Just to leave it there, just to notice it. And then once we're familiar with naming it, we can create a bit more comfort, a little bit, maybe it's sort of coming down into our body a little bit. So we go from like naming it, we were playing weird tennis, into maybe starting to be able to identify it in the moment. And initially that might feel a bit like it could add to the game. So particularly if the other person isn't so familiar with the terminology or with this kind of like this choice that you want to make to kind of cool things down and step out of the game playing. But to notice it in the moment, even if that means just noticing it inside yourself, going, oh, okay, we're in it now, we're playing weird tennis. I've got a choice about how I respond. And then stage 3 is when we come into that place and we go, oh, it's kind of coming down into our body and going, okay, that little calm voice going, playing weird tennis, I don't choose to play it anymore. I'm going to step off the court. And that may mean taking time out. It may mean in a calmer moment with the other person, if you find that you're playing it a lot together, in a calmer moment and choosing that moment, you know, consciously, choicefully, kind of contracting with each other even around when we notice that this thing is starting to ramp up, to say, maybe like it's a bit like having a safe word or just calling a time out and going, hang on, we're doing that thing, let's take a breath and just step away from it and come back and talk about this later. And often when we do that and we come back to it in a calm frame of mind without that kind of emotional like kind of overdrive, often what we find is that we were talking at cross purposes, that we were, or that one of us had a worry about something that they weren't vocalizing, and the other party was picking up on that, seeing it but not knowing what it was. So picking up on the emotion that was attached to the anxiety maybe, but because it wasn't being articulated, they weren't able to really hear it. They were just feeling it, and that was ramping up their emotional response without them even realizing it. So coming into this kind of cooler place can be really, really beneficial in helping us to communicate more effectively with the other person. And then that mastery phase is when we notice the pre-match warm-up. So it's really interesting. And as you start to, if this resonates with you, as you start to kind of notice this over the coming kind of weeks, months, whatever, and you notice that pre-match warm-up, how things can, like it's kind of okay, and then they might descend into a bit of a knockabout, and everybody thinks, yeah, we're having fun, I'm only joking, everything's fine, I didn't really mean it, blah 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 blah. There's phrases from my past, and we may even think truly that it's a bit of fun at first, and then it can descend into a full-on rally of weird tennis until the bitter end. And of course, no one ever wins. I think mastery is notice. So it's noticing that pre-match warm-up. It's noticing it enough to be able to go, oh, hang on a minute, internally, hang on a minute. I think this is going to turn into one of those matches, those weird tennis matches. What can I do to stop that happening? What can I do? It's not their fault. What can I do? Because ultimately we can only decide our own actions, obviously, always. And it's kind of coming into that space, that liminal space, where that Viktor Frankl talks about, which is between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our power and freedom to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and happiness. So it's this space between not hugely conscious, things are starting to descend. Oh, hang on, moment of consciousness, moment of choice, liminal space, moment of choice. And then from there comes the, what do you choose to do? Do you choose to pick up your racket and play the game? Or do you choose to walk away from the court and go and get a cup of tea instead? Or a glass of Robinson's, to continue the tennis analogy. And obviously, this becomes even easier when both parties are familiar with the same terminology. So even if this sort of phrasing or this metaphor around weird tennis doesn't resonate with you, maybe there's something else, maybe some other kind of metaphor has resonated, or there's something else that you've kind of thought of in the past that could become an anchor. And something that you and and perhaps you're a significant other or a colleague with whom this kind of often happens. Maybe there's something that you could both know and both be equipped to notice what's happening. And in the analogy of the weird tennis, to choose to put down your rackets and maybe meet at the net and shake hands before the game has even begun. And also to recognize that every player is equal. There is no winner ever. If we all step into conversations with a mindset that we're all coming into it with the best intentions, adult to adult, I think we tend to get a better outcome. And from here, I think there comes some learnings, actually, maybe some development, like personal development, around the quality of how we listen to each other. That's a really significant part of this. So it's how we, part of what I've been talking about today is how we listen to ourselves, how we listen to the noise, how we listen to the kind of like the subtle messages that are arising, and what we choose to do with those. And there's also a really practical part around how we listen to the words and listen to the body language of the other person, so that we don't fall into that space of making assumptions and laying our own interpretation of what's going on upon them. And that can be immensely powerful in how to create a really positive and fruitful conversation. So I'm going to read now this journal entry, and I think you'll see maybe why it is that it felt particularly resonant, considering what we're talking about today. And I would sort of invite you just to, if you're sitting somewhere and it's safe to do so, just close your eyes perhaps. Just have a listen. It's like listening to a story, or maybe just stare out of a window and have a look at the trees, have a look at the sky, and then after this we'll close the podcast. But so I'll just say thank you so much for listening here, and if anything there has really resonated with you, you've got any thoughts about it, I'd really love to hear it. So you can get in contact with me on Instagram, Regroup Henny, or on Facebook on Regroup, and also email through the website. So yeah, I'd be really, really interested to hear how it's resonated with you. Okay, so settling in. So this is day 124, so it was quite a while ago. Surrender. Rhymes with tender. Such lovely words. Make my heart smile. This idea of release and flow. Where does that go when we forget it? These times where there seems nothing but resistance, a forgetting of the flow, just the chatter of our minds, a disconnect, like the lady being chopped in half by the magician, no longer attached to her whole self. Our heads start leading the way and charging forward, dragging the rest of us with them, on the hunt for something, but not sure what. The endless round of thoughts that often lead us nowhere, until we stop, regroup, reconnect, and rest. The act of talking with someone else is such a vital part of rebuilding that connection, trusting that they will help us navigate our way through the barriers we erect, even as we sit with folded arms and allow the voices of dissent to rule our thoughts. The act of expressing these thoughts allows our higher self, our conscious self, our true self, to observe what's being thought and unpick what those thoughts are hiding, what they're trying to protect us from, and unveil the true vulnerability that lies beneath them. And that is part of the art of surrender. The second wave is the tenderness, the act of opening up our hearts to accept and acknowledge our vulnerability and let it be, not put it away, and decide with a fuller self, a reconnected self, the restored woman in the magician's act, to be kinder, to observe with loving humour the place we had been taking ourselves to when we were disconnected. This idea of loving humour is so essential, I feel. It's hard to be stressed, anxious, angry when we have a smile on our face, and not a masking smile, because they don't reach the eyes, but a smile that starts in the eyes and cannot be suppressed. It makes its way down the face, tugging at the corners of our mouth, lifting our lips into a crescent moon and our cheeks into mounds of visible joy. Ah, the pleasure of a smile. the cellular bubbling it releases as it unleashes a serotonin that then starts to flow through our bodies, a hormonal antidote to the cortisol and adrenaline and testosterone that flowed there before when our heads were heading somewhere though they knew not where. This act of heartfelt surrender, relaxing into ourselves, allowing ourselves to sit, weighted and grounded, connected to our surroundings, ourselves and to others, conscious, present. It's a pleasant place to be. And if for no other reason than that, it's good to go there. And it doesn't mean that the things that need to be done won't get done. It's just they get done in a different way. Our thoughts are clearer, our minds less rushed. We can explore different options, different opportunities, instead of only being able to sit on the roundabout of one idea, or the seesaw of two, or the swings of highs and lows of a bunch of conflicting thoughts. We get to explore the whole playground of our minds and choose the game we play. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed that regroup hour. Yes, like I say, do let me know if anything has resonated. And I look forward to joining you next week. Take care.